Alright, now let's get coloring onto this. Let's get to coloring on the skin. And I like starting with the skin just because it's the easiest to do. Not much, there's not a lot of work that we really need to get, preliminary, lighting or work that we really need to set up. So let's go ahead and get started. So when it comes to this illustration, I'm kind of just imagining it all, frontal lighting kind of feel. I'm not going to go anything crazy with the lighting just because, as beginners, it's easier to just start with something easy and, nothing too hard. So I'm going to be starting on the skin. So I'm actually going to first start off with coloring in our white, and that's just going to start off with, give us a base of where to start with our Crayolas. So when it comes to Crayolas, we always want to just, blend and overlap colors. We always want to layer on the colors just because it will give the most impact. So even if you can't see the color on where it is, just color in everything, just color everything in white for the skin, and we will blend on top of it later. White can also be used as a blending tool as well. So all these areas here, such as the belly area, and the legs. And this is just our base here, so this is a good base to start off with because it's a light color. Then what we are going to do is we are going to take our light peach, or not light peach, a peach, and then just lightly shade this in. You don't have to don't press very hard, because the harder you press, the easier it is to make mistakes and accidentally make a big mark, which you can't take back. So color very, very lightly, use very, very light pressure, and just watch the color form over her face. If you really want a smudging tool, a good smudging tool would be like a piece of tissue paper, and you can just, draw over. You can just draw over or smudge over the colors. Now, I'm not going to do that just because I don't really do that very much, but you can do that. Maybe I can try it out sometime. Just roughly color this all in. Because we have the white as a beginning or starter color, this can be a bit more opaque later on. This can get more opaque later on, or it can be a bit more vibrant. So you don't have to color over the lines, but coloring over the lines just a little bit is fine. This is just blocking it all in. And plus, since it's so light, you won't really notice it very much. So here is our base color. We can just continue building on it. So let's take let's see, what is this color here? Let's take a salmon color, and let's just kind of lightly, once again, just lightly glide over. Give it a slight tinge of color or saturation. So this redness will help with making the skin a bit more alive, because when you're blushing, or when you have red in your skin, or little bits of tint, whatever it is, with your skin tone, more color means more life. If your colors are too pale, it'll make her look like a vampire. And depending if you want that for your character or not, it just depends on you. So I'm putting a little bit more color into her skin. Same thing over here. Just make sure everything is just lightly colored, and we can just overlay or layer on the colors on top. So be patient. This takes a while to build up the colors. So once we have our very, very light base, we can go ahead and take our peach again, and then we are going to press a little bit darker now. What we are going to do is we're going to add a little bit more pigment into her skin that we didn't earlier. So just kind of, once again, press a little bit harder now, so you can see the color starting to form. And darken areas such as, like the corners of the face, where the eyelids are, because that, that is usually a place of shadow. So areas around the nose is good, kind of like a little blushing area here is nice to add, more pigment. And if you want a gradient underneath, down towards the face, you can do that as well. I'm adding a little bit of gradient towards the bottom of the face here just to kind of make sure the face looks more round. Add a little bit more towards where the shadow is going to be around the wrist, because the ruffles here will cast a shadow down onto the wrist, so you want to add a little bit more pigment there. And same around where the elbow is. Oh, I forgot an area here. There. So adding some more pigment towards the joints is a good idea too. It looks more vibrant that way. It's always nice to have like a gradient. So anything, that another rule of thumb that you guys can do is, every time it cascades downward, you can put more pigment downward because it's almost kind of like a shadow. So if you want, you guys can do that. So adding some more pigment around the belly area. And also around the legs. So I like to add a lot of pigment around, the fleshy bits here, just because it kind of has a nice gradient to it, especially when, when there's socks that kind of are a bit more tight on the skin, it looks more aesthetic that way. And especially around that part, you want to add a little bit more color just so it looks like it's kind of folding in space. So far so good. We have our base layer still, we're still applying more color. So I'm going to add some pigment with our browns now. So I'm going to take my tan, and I'm just going to be adding, a rough layer of shadows. And since this shadow, since these are more like a frontal lighting, usually you would add shadows where the hair is overlapping the face. So as you can see, you have hair strands, going on top of the face here. Add some shadows there because that's where the light is. That's where the shadow is being cast. So let me zoom in a little bit more so you guys can see. There. Adding shadows around where the nose is, just to kind of pop it out a little bit. Around the hair here, add a little bit of shadow in a similar shape to the hair here. And let's add a little bit of pigment around the lips, just to show that, this is just kind of showing some shadow there, just to kind of pop it out a little bit more. And around the neck, you want to add a little bit of shadow down there as well. I'm kind of making the shadow here a little bit harsher. It's just because usually shadows cast, the shadow that's cast on the neck is pretty harsh. So, and I want that to pop out from the skin here. So let's just make that a little bit darker. If you want, you can even blend some of the colors up here as well by taking this tan color and making a gradient around the face. If you want a softer look, go in circular motions. That's what it looks like. I'm also going to add more salmon. And then just blend it into the brown here, just to give it some more pigment, or just more life into it. So it's not, just brown. There's a little bit of pink to it. And I'm especially going to add it around the lips here, the bottom lip, because it looks cute. It's more like lip gloss. Adding this salmon is also good for like a nice little blush. But notice how this pink goes really well with the brown, and it matches and it kind of blends really well. So if you want to blend skin tones nicely, you want to mix a tan with a kind of like a reddish color. And of course, take your white and blend it even more so it's a little bit smoother. So I like my whites just because it just blends everything in a smoother feel rather than make it super grainy. And of course, I mean, you can't really expect too much with color pencils like Crayola because, I mean, they're cheap, but two, they have a very smooth texture or kind of like granular kind of texture that works well with this kind of paper. So you can't really expect too much to make it super smooth and nice. Just go where it's most comfortable. Now I'm going to add a really, really bright red, a red orange here, just add a little bit more pop of color around the cheeks because I think the cheeks especially is cutest when it's red, or especially, you know, on girls, you know, you usually like to add, a lot of artists usually like to add a lot more pigment around the cheeks just because it looks more youthful. And of course, just like in makeup, where you put your blush changes the structure of your face. So I'm putting it more around the eyes and kind of creepy in towards the cheeks because I don't want her to look like a clown. I want it to look have like this kind of mature feel to it. So far, as you can see, as we layer more colors on top, it's starting to look more realistic. I'm going to add just a touch of this really, really bright red in the inner corners of her mouth. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Harvest Gold and once again just kind of apply a little bit of color on here, just to make her a little bit more tan rather than super pale. I'm applying very, very light pressure, by the way, so it's not overbearing. But you can see that even these yellowish colors match well with, you know, peach or rosy colors. So it makes her look less super pale and just more like healthy fair. I'm using a pink here just to kind of continue blending in my reds. And I think that looks pretty good. So as you can see, you know, in comparison with everything else, because we layer on the colors, this has become a lot smoother and just overall a lot more lifelike. So we're going to continue the process here. Let's see, we're 12 minutes in. We still have some more time. So now let's go ahead and start with the bottom here. So once again, we are going to overlay the colors with a nice salmon. Oh, actually, we're going to layer more colors with the peach here just to kind of give it some more punch. So once again, apply light pressure. So I'm just applying this peach over everywhere here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tan and I'm going to start marking out my shadows. And shadows would include areas like underneath the ruffles here that would have a shadow. And of course, depending on your lighting, if your lighting is a soft lighting, your shadows will be very, very soft. And that's what I will probably do for this in this scenario. If your lighting is very sharp, you would see the shape a little bit clearer. So once again, I'm adding a little bit more pigment around the elbows here because it's kind of going down in space, and you would see more shadow there. And I'm also rendering this like a little cylinder. So notice how this is kind of round. I'm shading this kind of rounded in a rounded manner. That's because, you know, your elbow is quite round itself, so you want to treat it like a cylinder. Once again, same here. We're going to have a shadow underneath where the ruffles are, or where the sleeves are. I'm also going to add a little bit of shadow along the sides because, you know, we have a bit of her body kind of like going over her arm here. So I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow here around the half side of her arm. And then I'm going to add a little bit more shadow as we reach the mittens. I'm also going to add a little bit of shadow along the sides here. So it's almost kind of like it's more dominant on this side, but we still have a little bit of shadow here. I'm going to use my white and I'm just going to color over on top and blend everything together. I'm also going to add a little bit of tan around her belly. Now, if you want to show her abs, you can. I don't think I'm going to, but I am going to show a little bit of the center line of her abdominal area, just to kind of push it out a little bit. I'm also going to add a little bit of shadow around where the belt is, because the belt is still casting a shadow there. So far, let's look at it compared to the face. Looks pretty good. Now let's add our salmon once again and just blend that into the browns. And blending into the browns gives it a more richer tone than it would just have with, regular browns. So you want to mix these colors together just to give it a better color mixing. Just a better outcome. Looks more like Copics now, doesn't it? But it's color pencil. You want to blend the shadows in a smooth manner, but not too smooth that it's like, like a pipe. Remember, this is skin. And remember, this is also a cylinder, sort of similar to a cylinder. So you want to make sure that it's rendered in a way that doesn't, make it look like a pipe. You want to make it look like skin. Let's go with our tan here. And let's just color it very, very lightly on top. This will give it a more yellowish tone, and therefore kind of like rather than that super pale look, we're going to give it a healthier, fair look. And this skin color also matches with the face, so just be aware of that. When you're coloring in skin tone, you want to make sure that every of the skin tone matches. Every part of the body matches with each other. So now let's blend with our pencil, our white pencil. And so far, so good. This is what it looks like. And I'm going to add a little bit of this red-orange just around where the shadows are, just to kind of pop it out. And I'm especially going to add it around the elbows here because it looks nice when there's some nice gradient around the elbows. I'm not going to overdo it, so this is just enough. Don't add too much red, but add enough red that it has a nice hint of life to it. So that is the belly area. So far, so good. Looking pretty nice. See, you can do a lot with Crayola. So anyways, now let's go ahead and take our salmon once again for the legs, and we are going to be coloring over these areas here, just where we last colored them. And now once again, I'm going to take my peach and I'm just going to, put more pigment down. And as we layer, the color will start popping out more. So sometimes you also have to memorize your steps, where you put your shadows, how you applied them. We're going to add some shadows, where, the fat is meeting with the other leg, the other part of her leg, and then also some shadows where the skirt is overlapping across. And definitely add a little dark shadow where the paw is overlapping the leg here, because there's not going to be much light there. Add a little bit of shadow towards where the socks are, just to kind of give it that nice, kind of squishy look. And then we are going to once again mix it in with our salmon. And then we are going to take our Harvest Gold and just, once again, make it more yellowish rather than super pale. Give her some color. If you want, you can also add this nice red-orange and then just add it around the shadow areas. Not everywhere, but just areas of curve. And there we have the skin. all nice and colored. So I'm actually going to take a brown here. Let's see, this is my brown. I'm going to take a brown here, and I'm going to add my darker darks. So my darker darks will be areas like where the neck is, where the head's casting a shadow around the neck. And I'm just going to add very, very little bit of it. I'm not going to add very much. I'm just going to add enough that it pops out everything else. I'm also going to add around the hair here, just kind of blend that in. So as you can see, it's not overbearing, and it's one, because I'm only adding in specific areas, but two is because, you know, we already have a good foundation going that it blends in with everything else. Oh, I forgot to add a little bit of red to this area here. So I'm going to add a little bit of my salmon down here. Just give it a kind of a pinkish pigment. I'm also going to add some browns on the inner part of the arm here where it's bent and it's covered. And then same with around the shadows here. So the shadows will have the darkest parts, but not dark enough that it becomes black. Just a little bit more and then we'll be done with the skin. For the skin, I want to add some areas of shadow where the thigh kind of curls in and around the, you know, underneath where the skirt is. And that is it for the skin. So let me know what you guys think. This is what it looks like as a whole. Very, very nice color, very, very nice pigment. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.